So my last video I was talking a little bit about things that you could do to, at a much quicker way, screen out what may be going on in your body. I mean, as I said, we're dealing with all these symptoms and it doesn't seem to be answered through blood tests. Things may look normal or it just doesn't make sense, and you try all these different things and it costs a huge amount of money. So I have a lot of patients coming to me and they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in treatments and tests and still haven't gotten closer to the answer. And again, as I mentioned, the test, or we use a technique called autonomic response testing here at the Karlfeldt Center. In addition to labs, it's not the only thing that we do, but it is a great screening tool. And I was talking yesterday about pinpointing viruses, bacteria, mold, Lyme, and so forth. And so I want to kind of go a little bit further of other things that you can do so you can really understand the scope of it and the ability. Obviously, we would need to spend hours on video for me to fully explain it, but I want to kind of give you the Cliff Note version. So let's say we went through the different pathogens. A lot of people are concerned about the impact of vaccines, for instance. So let's say you have a child, and they may be a little bit on the autistic behavior, or they may be, and this can also be you as an adult, dealing with brain fog or neurological conditions, or things are just not right, or I got the flu vaccine and I just haven't felt good since then. So then we can then use, you see here, get this test kit with all these different vaccines. So you can actually go through and test, is any one of these vaccines impacting you? And let's say that you're dealing with the brain fog or any neurological, and then you have these different brain SAR codes. So these relates to different components in the brain. So you can then pinpoint and see where in the brain is the issue, and you can then tie that together with the vaccine, or you can tie it together, maybe a nutritional deficiency, or you can tie it together with like a chemical or an environmental toxin. For instance, here, you have all these different environmental toxins, and these are not the only ones that I have that are different vials here, but you have like Roundup, the glyphosates that we're exposed to is such a high level. Is that impacting my brain in any way? Or is that impacting my neurological system, my hormones? Or mercury, or MSG, or paint fumes, or benzene, asbestos, Agent Orange. If somebody that's been in the Vietnam War, and the impact of that, fiberglass, all these different things. You can then test and see, is my brain impacted by it? Is my neurological system? Or you can check things like your hormone receptor sites, for instance. I mean, a lot of us, we're dealing maybe with a thyroid issue, but the thyroid test looks great. But one of the components that a lot of people forget is that even though maybe enough of your thyroid hormones floating around, or enough of your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone floating around in the bloodstream, they still gotta land somewhere to stimulate the cell to create an action. So there's a landing site there, which is called a receptor. And if that receptor is not functioning properly, and there can be some chemical or heavy metal that blocks it, so the thyroid hormone tries to kind of land, but it is blocked and it's not able to get in there, and you're still exhausted even though your thyroid hormone levels are perfect. So then you can then test, so these are the hormone receptor sites. You can then test and see which receptor site is functioning, is not functioning, and then once you pinpoint that, you can then combine that to test, for a vial, is it mercury that's doing it, or maybe it's an infectious agent that's producing metabolic waste that's kind of clogging up those receptor sites. Or maybe it's a nutritional deficiency, because you need nutrients to build these receptor sites. And if you don't have enough nutrients, then these receptor sites become dysfunctional. So now you have, again, floating perfectly, the amount of hormones perfectly fine, or amount of insulin could be looking great in your bloodstream, and you're insulin resistant, because the insulin is not able to land to the receptor site, and you want to figure out why is that receptor site dysfunctional? And so then you can use this test in a very efficient way to pinpoint and see, what's going on with the receptor site, what's going on with the insulin receptor site, maybe, what's going on with your testosterone receptor site, or, the hormones coming from the pituitary, that's communicating to the ovaries. Maybe the receptor sites, from the pituitary hormones are not functioning properly, not communicating to the ovaries or the testes properly. And then you can also test things like going even further. You can test the hormones directly themselves. So you can go through, then here's all these different endocrine, your endocrine system. So you can then pinpoint and see maybe there's a hormonal component that is off. Instead of doing bunches of tests, as you see here, you're dealing with the pancreas, epinephrine, estriol, estradiol, estrone, follicle stimulating hormone, gastrin, glucagon, and I mean there's a lot of different hormones that we don't think about and that we don't test. We test for the main ones, thyroid, some of the sex hormones, and maybe cortisol, and that's about it. There's so much more out there that can be tested, but again, thousands of dollars to test all these things. So you can then go through and find this out really, really quickly through the techniques we use at the center. Or something that's really important is, how do we produce energy? That's called Krebs cycle or glycolysis. So here are all the different steps for the cells to produce energy. So if we're fatigued, if we don't repairing properly, maybe there's something here that is out of balance. And we can then, through this test, we can then pinpoint and screen out what areas that we need to focus on and what nutrients may be impacting that area, or what chemical or what infection or what heavy metal may be making that area not function the way that it should. And another component like methylation cycle. How do you methylate? So that has to do with how you detoxify and also produce neurotransmitters, and it part in so many different functions within the body. Methylation, and a lot of us are dealing with what's called genetic SNPs or genetic dysfunction, like MTHFR. You probably have heard that term. And so, and that again, doing testing all your genetic SNPs costs a lot of money, in addition to then trying to figure that out. I mean, you get these sheets back and you see all these SNPs and you say, now what? Well, what does that mean? What am I supposed to do now? And so here you have these different methylation components, and you can then muscle test and see, you can just do the testing that we do here and screen out, where in the methylation cycle am I having an issue? And again, is it some kind of nutrient that I can support that with? Or is it some chemical or heavy metal or vaccine, or is it the 5G that I'm exposed to that is interfering with my methylation? And how do I maximize the methylation if I have what's called a genetic defect or SNPs in that area? So it's so much, and you can do neurotransmitters directly, dealing with anxiety, depression, whatever, and neurotransmitters, not only how we feel mood-wise, but it also has to do with how cells communicate, with nerve cells communicate with each other. So if we're deficient in that, we can be exhausted, we cannot repair. There's so many symptoms that come along with that, and that's the issue, is that any symptom can be caused by pretty much anything. And so that's why it's so hard when you have these complex health issues, is to know exactly where do I need to go in order to be able to figure this out. Is it some pathogen? Is it some chemical, heavy metal, toxicity? Is it 5G? Is it a nutritional deficiency? Is it Lyme? What is it? And that is what is so cool with the test that we use, and being able to then screen and quickly get to the results and to see what is the most important thing to address right now, and take that step. And that's also, when you do this, is that it's kind of like you're opening a safe. Maybe you can't fix everything all at once, because a lot of times we have several things that needs to be fixed, but the body will tell us what is the most important thing to fix first, and then what is next, and so forth. So it actually gives us a sequence, in addition to telling us what it is that needs to be addressed.